Hilchas Para Adumah Perik Asiri. So there could be a Seder where a person goes ahead and he's Mamalim Mayim Chayim from a Mayon, and then he's right away Mekadesh that Mayim Chayim, and then he's right away Mazeh from this Mayim Chayim on someone that's tummy. But the Rambam is saying over there, it doesn't have to be the Seder, the things that happen right away. You could go ahead and be Mamali Mayim Chayim. One person is Mamali the Mayim, and another person goes ahead and he's Mekadesh the Mayim, and a third person go ahead and be Mazeh the Mayim. That's number one. Also, the Kiddush doesn't have to be in the original keli in which you were Mamali. You could be Mamali in one keli, and then pour it over into another keli, and make over there the Kiddush, and then the Hazah. Or you could have another situation where the Hazah doesn't have to be from the original keli that you made the Kiddush. You could, the Kiddush doesn't have to be in the original keli that there was the Milui, and Al Derazeh, the Hazah doesn't have to be from the original keli that there was the Kiddush. You could have Mayim Mikudashim and pour it over into another keli, and from that keli you'll make Hazah. That's the first halacha. Perek Asiri. Hamamale Mayim LeKiddush, Eini Tzorach Shehei Hu Atzmei HaMekadesh VaHamazeh, that the same person that was the Mamali, he's the one that's Mekadesh the Mayim, and he's the one that's Mazeh from the Mayim. Ela Mekadesh Echad, one person can make the Kiddush, and there's another person can make the Kiddush after the first person made the Milui, and then Mazeh Echad, and another person makes the Hazah. That's as far as the people that are making the Milui, the Kiddush and the Hazah. V'chein, as far as the Keli is concerned, V'chein Mamali Adam B'Keli, a person can be Mamali in one Keli, U'ma'ara Mikeli L'Keli, and pour this water into another Keli, and then U'mekadesh B'Keli Acher, then it'll be Mekadesh in that other Keli. In other words, you don't have to be Mekadesh in the Keli in which you made the Milui. That's what the Rambam says. The Rashi and Tesis and Chulin hold differently. They hold that the Kiddush has to be in the original Keli that you made the Milui. But the Rambam says not. Ma'ara Mikeli L'Keli, Mekadesh B'Keli Acher. And then another din, U'ma'ara Hamayim HaMekudashim Mikeli L'Keli, U'mazeh Mikeli Acher. Once you made the Kiddush, so then again you could take these Mayim Mekudashim and pour it into another Keli, and from the second Keli, make the Hazah. In other words, it doesn't have to be in the original Keli of the Milui, it doesn't have to be in the original Keli of the Kiddush, and it doesn't have to be the same people. You could have different people. Halacha beis. Memali Odam Mayim, Umanichon Etzli, B'lei Kiddush, Kol Zman Sheyirtza. In other words, if a person was Memali Mayim, he could go ahead and keep this water not Mekudesh. The water is ready to be Mekudesh, but he's not being Mekadesh as long as he wants. Now, obviously, we learned before that he's not allowed to do Malach, and there's not allowed to be Hesach Hadas. So it has to be Be'efin that there's no Hesach Hadas. Now, the Lashon Rambam is Kol Zman Sheyirtza, Ve'em Bekach Klum. So L'chura, it sounds like he could even be sleeping. So the question is, how could he sleep? L'chura, if he goes to sleep, so there's Hesach Hadas. So on that they bring note, that if he puts it B'mokim Meshumer, and then he goes to sleep, so therefore that's also not called Hesach Hadas, which is a Chidush. It's a Chidush that brings from Aruch HaShulchan. Al Kol Pon, the Rambam doesn't say it clearly, but the Rambam is saying, Kol Zman Sheyirtza, so he's saying it means even if he goes to sleep. Ve'em Bekach Klum. And then the Rambam continues, Umilichon Mimokim L'mokim, this water could be brought Mimokim L'mokim, and Me'ir L'ir. And V'neisna Aleim Efer Makachim. He could take this water that he was Mamali, he doesn't have to make the Kiddush here, he could take it wherever he wants. We'll soon learn Behemshech that Mayim Mekudoshim, there's Hagbolas in traveling with it. But as far as the Mayim, which you took the Mayim Chaim and you didn't make Kiddush yet, there's no Hagbolas. V'neisna Aleim Efer Makachim, B'chol Yirtza. V'chein HaMayim HaMekudoshim. The Mayim HaMekudoshim, the Mayim that you already made the Kiddush, which means you put the Efer of the Paradum in, is again menichon adam etzle yomim v'shanim. You could keep it, you could store it by you yomim v'shanim. Make sure that it doesn't become tummy. Umaz, and it shouldn't be b'mokim tummy. Umaz me'am b'chol yem shu tzarich, and you could use it whenever you need. Achi yitamu, until there's no longer any mayim. And then umeilichon, you could go ahead and travel and transport this mayim mikudashim mimokim lemokim u'meir liir. That's it. That's this din of b'negei mayim kudashim. You could transport it. And then u'mishamer adam efer para etzlei. A person could also have efer para by him. He could have efer para. U'melichim u'mokim lemokim meir liir. So b'kitzur, a person could have by himself sai mayim which are ready to be mekudesh and be melichim lemokim lemokim. A person can have already mayim which are mekudashim and melichim lemokim lemokim. And a person can have the efer of para adumah and also be melichim lemokim lemokim. But as far as the mayim mekudashim, the efer para adumah, there's a hagbola. That's what the Rambam says here. Pa'machas helichu keli shehoyu b'meichatos b'svina b'yard. V'nimtza kizayis min amez b'karka svina. Lepil, there was a Kazayis Menames Bekarka Svina, and as a result of that, of Nitmu Hamayim. Now, the Shaila is exactly what happened. Was the Pshat is that it was mile on the Kazayis Menames, that's Rashi, that's how Rashi learns in Chagiga, that they were mile on Karka Mes. The Rambam Pirush Mishnayos says there's a din, we'll learn Behemshech, that the Efer and the Mayim Kudoshim is not allowed to be Bimokim Tomei. Even if it doesn't become Tomei, it wasn't actually mile alames. The Moshel, it was in a Klicheres, which is Summit Puzzle, so it's not really becoming Tomei. But then there's a Nuch Zorin by Efer Para Adumah, and there is a Mayim Kudoshim, that it shouldn't be Bimokim Tomei. So the pale over here, there was Nimtzik, that's how the Ram learns the problem was, that there was a Gazayis Menames in the Karka Sfina, and therefore the Mayim Kudoshim were Bimokim Tomei. V'nimtu Muhamayim is Be'esu Shah, Gozru Bezin HaGodl, She'ein Mavirin Mei Chatos, and also V'le Efer Chatos, even the story was B'mei Chatos, but the Gzeir was also on Efer Chatos, B'nohar U'b'sfina. They shouldn't go into a nohar through a sfina. In other words, you shouldn't be maver Efer Chatos or Mei Chatos on a nohar in a sfina. And also, V'le Yishitim Al Pnei HaMayim, you shouldn't let it float on the water. In other words, you shouldn't make it float on the water. If you have a keli floating on the water, it's similar to a sfina. And also, v'liyamed b'tzat, and either the keli is floating on the water, or even if you're floating. If a person's swimming on the water and somehow or another he's holding a keli with this mayim kudoshim or this efer para, so you shouldn't do that. That's part of the gzeir. And v'liyamed b'tzad hanor mikan, and v'yizrikim l'tzad hasheni. So these three things, he shouldn't carry it over in a sfina. He shouldn't like swim across this nohar, a nohar, with the mayim kudoshim or with the efer of the para aduma, and al derazeh, you shouldn't let it float over the nor. Aval ever hu adam b'mayim atzavari, he could walk across this nor until his neck. Ubiyad the efer para mayim kudoshim, because that's not similar to the story of Sfina. Throwing it across the Sfina of the nor, vices, that's similar to the Sfina. Because you're bringing it from one side of the nor to the other side of the nor without like touching the ground. It's like similar to a sfina. So throwing it would be similar to a sfina. Now then, as a floating is also similar to a sfina. Masha'inkin, but if you walk with it, even though you're walking in the water, so that's not a problem. That's not part of the gzeira. V'chein, also Adam v'kelim harikonim shehim terim lechatos. So if a person that's toher lechatos goes over a sfina in a nor, or a mayim shenismalu lechatos, or you're talking about the water that was nismalu to make mechatos. Above adayin leniskachu is mavir neso. The takon, the gzeira was only on mayim mekudoshim and efer. The gzeira wasn't on a keli, that once a keli passes by in this sfina on the nor, it becomes possible to put in it mechatos. And it wasn't a psul on an adam, and it also wasn't psul on the mayim that you drew in order to put in the mechatos and to make it into mechatos. The gzeir was only on the mechatos and the efer. Mavir nesim benoru b'sfinas. So these things, adam v'kelim arikonim and umayim shenismalu lechatos. So there was no gzeir on it. The gzeir was only on mayim mekudoshim and efer, and the gzeir was a svina, or to be shot al pnei mayim, or to throw it from one side of the river to the other side of the river. But there was no gzeira of walking across the river holding the mayim mekudoshim and al derez of the efer par. Now this gzeira was only in a nar. The Ram says halacha gimel mavirin mayim mekudoshim b'sfina b'yam hagadol. In the yam hagadol there was no gzeira, and also the shatten them al pnei mayim. You could swim across it or make it float across the water. It's not a problem. Shli gozru el hamayim hakudoshim ala efer and benar. So it has to be, we're talking about mayim mekudoshim and efer. That's what they were geyser on. And where was the gzeira? On the nar, in a nar, and the gzeira was a sfina, or floating across, or throwing it across. Halacha dalet. Hamoylech mayim lekachon. If you're bringing water, which is the water was you drew it from a mayon, and you want to be mekadosh it. Ve'ein tzarich leimar mayim sheniskachu. And certainly, if we're talking about mayim that were already niskachu, is liyavshil hakeli lacherev elu lefanov. Shenema lemishmeres l'meinida. So we learn out that the water side the mayim mekudoshim, and even the water which is oimet to be liskadosh, whereas the water that was drawn in order to make it into mechita, meinida, has to be a mishmeres. It has to be watched. Bisman shein shmurim. So if you're holding it behind you, you're not really watching it. So you have to hold it lefanov. Bisman shein shmurim ein meinida. V'im la psulim, nachamo. Mishmeres le'nida, so we learn out, Bizman she'in shmurim, so then hey menida, they have a din of menida. V'im la psulim. Now, Haresha milish te chavias. He fills it up 2 chavias, both of them from menida, is nesen achas lefonav achas lacherev. Mipnei shehi efsher. Because it's impossible, he can't put in both lefonav, so Mele puts one lefonav and one lacherev. So the shayla is good, it's efsher. I will appeal it says mishmeres le'menida, so it has to be mishmeres. So how could the acherev be kosher? So it's brought down that the pshat is because since he has the menida lefonov, so that causes him to remember about the menida shalachrav. So normally, preferably, it should be lefonov. But over here, since it's yefsha, so you can rely on the fact that it's mishmeres menida. How is it mishmeres? By the fact that you're watching the one in front of you, so that's reminding you that you have the one behind you. Halacha mei chatos sheshoklon b'mishkol. You wanted to weigh the mechatos. You have mechatos, and you wanted to weigh it. So how do you weigh? You have a weight on one side, and you have a scale. So you have the weight on one side, and then you have the mechatos on the other side, and you want to weigh it. So if you're not really having das on this mechatos, because you're having more das on the mishkol or on the weight, so then it's psul because it's a psul because it has a das. However, v'imlav, if there was no hesach hadas on this mechatos, so then it's ksherim. That's talking about if you're not using the mechatos as a weight, fakert, you're weighing the mechatos. Avalim shakal dvar macher b'mechatos. You already know the weight of the mechatos. You know the weight of the mechatos because you weighed the mechatos and it was lehisiyam daita, so the mechatos is kosher. But now you're weighing other things with this mechatos. Is a hail v'asim mishkelis. Since you're making this mechatas into a mishkelis, is possible. Why? Because again, she'enzu mishmeres. Mishmeres means you're watching it for mechatas. Over here, you're using it as a weight. When you start using it as a weight, so you're not really watching it as a mechatas. It's being used for something else. That's the number one. Then the Rambam continues. Kol elu hatohirim shememalim eshemekachim eshemazim. All those people that have to be torah, but they go ahead and they're memali the water to be made for the menida. Or shemekachim, they kaddish the water by throwing in the efer apora, eshemazim, and v'chein kol hakelim shememalin umekachin shebehem or v'shemazim them. All those kelim that you use either for the milui or for the kiddush or for the azor, which all of them need kelim. Same hoyu tvuliyim. If those kelim were tvuliyim, is aval pishli her of shimshon is arei luksherim. Shekol ma'isa hapora v'hamilui v'hakiddush v'azoya is kosher b'tvuliyim k'misha b'yarnus. Even though it says vasav ish tor, we learn it has to be tor, but we learn out that mipi hashmol lamdu that tor doesn't have to be tor l'truma as long as it's tor l'ma'isa sheni, so a tvuliyim is tor l'ma'isa sheni, so a tvuliyim is kosher sai for the hazor and sai for the kiddush and sai for the tefillah and al that of the kelim is kosher if they're a tvuliyim. Umepnei hatzdukim metamim is called kli shetef umadbilan esom. Mepnei hatzdukim they're makpid to be metami those kelim which are kli shetef kelim which can be used to which you could be table. Kli shetef means kelim which you could be table. Umadbilan esom, and then you're madbilim them and b'acharkach mishtamshem b'mechatos. So mepnei hatzdukim you're makpid that the mechatos should be dafka used with kelim which are tvuliyim. Now really we learned about this before that there was akbad, but the lashon of the Rambam earlier when the Rambam said in Perek Aleph, the Rambam said the lashon kol hakelim shemachnisn l'teichem efer hapara is kulam tvuliyim. So over there he was talking about efer hapara, that about efer hapara have to be tvuliyim. Here the Rambam seems to be saying that the mechatas also should be tvuliyim. So it's brought down. The answer is that no, b'negei efer hapara yitaka hakpada should be tvuliyim. So mainly Yishaka shouldn't use l'mashal keli, which is not makabel tuma, in order to contain the efer hapara, because then it's not going to be tvuliyim, and it has to be tvuliyim. Masha'enkin, when we're dealing with mechatos, so if it's a keli which can't be makabel tuma, or if it's going to be makabel tuma, you're not going to be able to be table like a kli cheres. So then you don't have to use it tvuliyim. It's not a hakpada that it should be tvuliyim. Masha'enkin, if we're dealing with kli shetef kelim which can be toivel, so then there's a hakpada that for the mechatas also should be used tvuliyim. It's nachamol. For the efer hapara is hakpada it should be used tvuliyim. So mainly you shouldn't use kelim which cannot be makabel tuma, and you shouldn't use kelim which are if they're going to be makabel tuma you can't be toivel. Masha'enkin b'negeya mechatas you could use kelim which are not makabel tuma or can be toivel. So Mela, there's no hakpada that has to be dafka b'tvul yem. But if you're using klei shetef, so Mela, there is an option of being toivelit. So then there is hakpada that you should be metamit and taka be toivelit. That's the hakpada. Halacha vov. Hakil ksherim lahazis. This hazor, the hazor from the mechatos on the tomei, everyone could do it. Chutz mi isha v'tumtum v'andregnes. Because the pasuk says v'toval b'mayim ish toher. So it says clearly ish, so it can't be an isha, and a tumtum nadregin is a suffix isha, so therefore it can't be used either. And also v'cheresh and a sheita. A cheresh and a sheita can also not be used, because we're going to learn later that it has to have kavana. The maza has to have kavana to be maza on the tomei, and the Rambam says also on the tomei litare, so he needs kavana, and a cheresh and a sheita doesn't have a din of kavana. And also the cotton shem beidas. If the cotton has no das, so also he has no kavana. So Mele Nochmal, everyone could do the hazor except for an isha, and al derazah tumtum bandregnes, because there is suffix isha, and also it has to be done with das, so it can't be done through a cheresh and a sheita, or it can be done through a cotton which ain't beidas. Avul cotton sheyesh beidas. If the cotton has das, so then kosher lahazis. In other words, the das of a cotton is enough to be mazah. That's called das. V'ha'orel is also kosher lahazis. An orel is kosher lahazis. Shein orel tummy. A tummy is now to be mazah. So we ishtor, but an oral doesn't have a din of a tummy. Now, cotton sheyesh b'das shehiza, cotton which has das and he was maza, and lepel v'isha misadose, and a woman is helping him. Kigoyin she'achzli amayim b'yodi, she was holding the water and he was dipping the aziv into the water and being maza. That's not a problem. Azor asik sheira, because lepel she wasn't involved in the azor. She was only helping him by holding the keli which had the water. Aber bulvat sheli teches b'yodi b'shas azor. She shouldn't be holding his hand while he's being mazir, because then it comes out that she's like helping, she's involved in the hazor. So that would be a problem. Is psula, because lepel comes out that she was mishtativ in the hazor, and the hazor has to be done dafka through an ish. It could be done through a cotton, but it has to be done through an ish. Halacha zayin. Hamaza tzorech lechaven ulahazis alatome u'detare. Because he has to have kavanah that he's going to be maza now, and he's being maza on this tomei in order l'tari. So the Lashon Rambam is that it has to be two kavanahs. In other words, he wants to be metayer, he's throwing it on this person, and the purpose of throwing it on this person is l'tari. The Ravid argues, the Ravid says, you have to be maza on this person, you want to be maza on the person, but the kavanah, that the reason for the azor is l'tari, is not essential. Because as long as you have kavanah, l'hazah on this person, even though the kavanah wasn't l'tari, is also beseder. But I'll come on, the Rambam paskins clearly, hamazet tzorech lechaven lahazes alatomi l'tari. V'imhiza shalei b'kavanah, he was mazel without a kavanah, and we're saying a kavanah l'tari is azoyosi psula. So the azoy is psula. That's the person that's being mazel. Avol zeh shemazin alav, the person that's getting the azor, the tomei, ain't it tzorech kavanah, he doesn't need kavanah. Elamazin ala adam l'daitiv shalei l'daitiv. Someone's mazel on someone that's tamei litare, so whether that person is having kavanah litare, not having kavanah, just like a keli is makabel. The hazor works on a keli, even though the keli has no kavanah. Al there is a person that's a tmei mess, even if he doesn't have kavanah, he's also gets torah. That's the number one. Now, Ram Avaiter Hamschaven lahazis lefonov. He's a lachrav. His kavanah was to be mazel lefonov. And vice to Yisach, that's how he brings from the Tiferes Yisrael, that it means he's mazel lefonov and he wants to be metayer all the tmei mesim that are lefonov. That was his kavanah. It wasn't like a specific person. He was mazel lefonov to be metayer all the tmeim that are lefonov. And lepel, when he started the hazor, it came out that the hazor ended up behind him. He was mazel la'achrav. His intention was to be mazel lefonov, but lepel, while he's moving his hand, he ended up being mazel la'achrav, which on that there was no intention at all. Or la'achrav, he wanted to be mazel la'achrav, he's a lefonov, he's a yosef psula, because there was no kavan at all. However, in his kavan lahazis lefonov, v'hizel itzdodim shelponov, has a yosef ksheira. So again, you have to say over here, he's not having kavanah for a specific person, because if he's having kavanah for a specific person, and lepel ends up being mazel on another person, so it's felt in kavanah. Over here, the pshat is he was having kavanah to be mazel on all the tmeim that are lefonov. And lepel, he ended up being maza on the people that were bitstodov. So lepel, that bitstodov is considered part of the lefonov. In other words, the tzodim of this person is nichlal in the kavanah of lefonav, and since he didn't have a kavanah for a specific person, his kavanah was to be maza on all the people that are lefonav, so the people that are b'tztadav are also considered part of the people that are lefonav. Halacha ches. Hamaza ain't it tzarech tefillah l'chol azoy. You don't have to dip the ezev into the water each time you maza. Ela toivel is ezev. Umaza hazoya achar azoy ad sheyidru hamayim. Because as long as there's still water and that water is being sprinkled on the tummy, that's beseder. And also, umaza hazoya achas al kama bnei adam, kama kelim ki achas afilu meya. There's a bunch of people in front of him, a number of people in front of him, another kelim in front of him. It makes an hazoya. So any of those kelim or any of those people that some of this azoya touched, so they became tar. Kol shu nagabeim and hamayim kol shu, if any amount of water touched any of these tmei mes, which he had nizinin to be sprinkled on all of them together, is tar. Abavahushi is chavan amazal lahazasolav. Only if there was a kavanah lahazasolav, because he doesn't have to have him specific. He has to have a general kavanah that all these things he wants to be mazan. Now tavalus eziv. He was table the Ezev, and is chaven lahazes al dover shemekabel tumay al adam. Now we're talking about the din of the tefillah. The tefillah of the Ezev has to be al manas lahazes on someone that's mekabel tumah, on someone that's mekabel that was tummy. There's tavalus Ezev, and is chaven lahazes al dover shemekabel tumay al adam, either on a keli that was mekabel tumah or al adam, and lepeil the hizam oisa tefillah al dover she'ena mekabel tumay al abema. He ended up being maza on something which is not mekabel tumah or on a behema. So yemnishiru mayim be'ezik. If water was left over, there's any tzarech lachzer lahatbel. Whereas even though lepel he started using it for something else which really didn't work, but nevertheless lepel, since the dipping, the tefillah in the water was done al menas to be maza on someone that's tummy, so lepel, that water which is left in the Ezev could still be used to be maz on someone that's stomach. Im nishiru mayim be'ezev ain't tzarech lazer lahadbu. Ela mazer min hashar ela adam ela kelim atmeim. You could go ahead and use that water because lepel the tefillah was done al manas lahazes on someone that's stomach. Shaharei tchilas tefillas iksherois. It was a proper tefillah. Avelim tavalus Ezev lahazes al davar sheini mekabel tumay ela beima. The tefillah was in order to be mazah on something that's in a mekabel tumay la behema. And Lepeli went ahead with this water that he was tevel and almanas to be mazah on something which really there's no din azoy on it because it's not mekabel tumay. And Lepeli went ahead and took this ezik and he was mazah lo adumah akeli atame is over here as yosi psula because the water that he was tevel, the water that he came into the ezik was water that he was tevel shalei almanas lahazes al davar tamis. Merely that water is possible. V'hiz ala adam elakeli atom as yosef psula chiyazel v'yitbul pam shniya and v'yischaven, and then he has to go ahead and have kavana in the tefillah pam shniya lahazis ala adam el adavar hamekabel tum. So the fact that was the water that came up in the Ezev as a result of being toivel to be maz on something that's not tamei is not water which is kosher l'tamei. But now that you go ahead and you toivel it again, so that water that you toivel again is kosher l'tamei. And vice versa, the fact that the Ezev was wet is not a problem because sof kol sof, as long as some of the water that now you are toivel the second time is going to come up in the hazoyah, so it will be kosher. It's not a problem. Halacha tes. Hitbul is Ezev. V'nischaven lahazis al davar she'eni mekabel tuma. So the din is hamayim hamenat from the water that's dripping out of this Ezev is ksherim, didn't become possible. That water knows the pail. The water that's in the Ezev, that's absorbed in the Ezev, is possible to use for hazoyah while it's absorbed in the Ezev because there was no tefillah. There's a din. There has to be a tefillah, and this tefillah you have to be mazah. Now this tefillah has to be a tefillah ksheira. What's that tefillah ksheira? That you would tevel amanas lahazis on someone tummy. If you would tevel not a tefillah ksheira because it wasn't amanas lahazis, so it's not a good tefillah. So you can go ahead and be mazah, but it doesn't passel the water. That water which is absorbed that came up in the Ezev, now that water is dripping down, so that water is still kosher. The fact that it was picked up in order to be maz on someone that's not tummy is not a problem. If that water dipped into a keli, you have to be mazah from a keli. You have to be mazah from the keli. So if that water dipped, you have to dip from a keli and then mazah. So if that water that was now on the Ezev, which wasn't kosher right now to use as azor, now they dripped into a keli, and then v'chazar v'hitbul b'emes ha'ezev, and then you went ahead and dip the Azev into this Keli, which had now the water that was menate from the Azev, which was originally Tovul, not al Manas Lahazis al Tomei, is V'hitbol b'emasa Azev b'kavon Lahazis al Dover HaMakabel Tuma, so then Azoyos Yikshurit, Azoyos Kosher. Halacha Yud, Meichatos shenismatu, that there's very little Meichatos left, is nevertheless Tevel b'em afilu Roshi Giv'elim Amazim. You can go ahead and be Tevel the tops of the Gevela. The Gevela is those little flowers that are coming out of the Azev, like we'll learn Behemshech. The Roshi Gevelim, and they dip into the water a little bit, and it's kosher because there's no shir or mazah. Aber bulvad shalei yisapik. In other words, you have to dip the Azev, the Gevelim into the water, but you can't take it and wipe the Azev onto the bottom of the keli, and through that have the Azev pick up wetness. It can't pick up its moisture through wiping it. It has to pick up its moisture by dipping it. That's this din. You have to be toivel afilu roshi givelim umaza, but vachli yisapik, you shouldn't wipe it. Now tzloiche shapiatzar, if you have a jar, which the opening of the jar is very narrow, is toivel. You could go ahead and put the aziv into the water in the jar, umayla kedarka, and then you pick it up, umaza. That's not a problem because you would toivel it, and you took it out. The fact that you had to squeeze it out, in other words, you had to schlep it out of that jar, and maybe you had to pull it out of the jar, and it went up to the sides of that opening. It's not a problem. Now the eni tzorich lizoir sheme yiga betzili akeli b'pam shniya. Now here l'chura, you're going to go ahead and now dip it a second time. So now when you're going to pick it up a second time, and you're going to be pulling it out from that narrow opening, so the water which is in that narrow opening is also going to come up on these givelim, on this azev. So l'chura, we said before, you have to dip the water. You can't wipe the water. So l'chura, now when you're pulling out these azev from this jug, which is slucha shepiatzar, so l'chura, you're wiping that water out when you're coming up. So it's not a problem because l'peil already you dipped it as well. So the fact that a little bit water that was like on the in that pia is also getting in is not a problem. It's bottle, and memela sof kol sof, you're going to be mazeh from the water that you dipped into. So the fact that a little bit of water that was also wiped up when you came out of it is not going to make it possible.